Today we're going to continue discussing the laws of Shabbat and the 39 principal works which are prohibited on the Shabbat. The next malacha concerns making nets out of string. The process for this is to tie a bunch of knots into loops so that you get a net. So the prohibition would be tying a knot. It is prohibited to tie a permanent knot on Shabbat. So a double knot would be prohibited. Also, tightening a knot which already exists and has become loose, and you tighten it, is also prohibited to be done on Shabbat. But a single knot would not be prohibited because it's very temporary. For that matter, to make a bow, like for instance tying your shoe with a bow rather than with a knot, is perfectly okay. The next malacha on the list is the prohibition to untie a knot. In the time of the temple, if one tied a knot incorrectly, they would undo it and retie it properly. So the untying of it for the purpose of retying it properly also became prohibited. Next malacha on our list is the prohibition to sew on Shabbat. Sew means to take two separate pieces of material, for that matter it doesn't have to be cloth necessarily, and to bring them together through a third medium. So if you take two pieces of material, sew them together with a thread, that's sewing. In a similar way, if you were to glue together two pieces of paper, that would be considered sewing. It's prohibited to glue two pieces of paper together. Also, to tape together two pieces of paper would be prohibited for the same reason. What about if your button comes loose on your jacket? Can you pull the thread in order to tighten it? No, you may not. That would be considered sewing as well. If a hem comes loose and you pull the thread in order to tighten the stitches, is also considered to be sewing and may not be done on Shabbat. Using a safety pin to bring together two pieces of cloth, as long as you do not put it in twice, you only do one stitch, so to speak, would be okay. The next malacha on the list is to tear apart two things which are attached. Tearing, it's the opposite of sewing. If they sewed something improperly, they would then undo it in order to re-sew it properly. I should mention that doing anything on Shabbat for a destructive purpose is not a violation of Shabbat. It needs to be done in a constructive way. So if one tears just for the sake of tearing, that isn't an outright violation. It's still prohibited rabbinically, but it isn't a Torah violation. So therefore, when we talk about tearing, we talk about tearing in a constructive way. For instance, one example would be you tear it apart in order to put it back together again properly. So let's say if you undo a seam so that you can sew it back properly, or to let it out a little bit, just undoing it is already a violation of Shabbat. As well, if you were to cut paper in a certain way, in a specific predetermined way, you're cutting out certain shapes, that is considered to be tearing because you're tearing constructively. The next malacha on our list is trapping. They would use the nets to trap animals in order to have the hide which they used in the curtains and the coverings for the tabernacle. So trapping an animal is prohibited. Setting up a trap in order to trap an animal is of course prohibited. Chasing an animal into an enclosed area so that you can easily catch it is trapping. Using dogs as they would in hunting in order to corner an animal into a specific place is also considered trapping. Fishing, whether with a net or with a fishing line or a fishing rod, is also considered trapping and prohibited. Setting up a mouse trap is also not permitted on Shabbat. I should mention that even if an animal is sleeping and you catch it, that would also be considered trapping. However, a turtle is not considered to be trapping. It walks so slowly that it was never considered to be free, and therefore just picking it up is not really trapping it. It's trapped by its very nature. It is, however, permitted if there is a dangerous animal, poisonous snake, or other dangerous animal, it is permitted to trap it in order for it not to cause damage to the people around.